Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Saturday, March 25th. If you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And if you point and click anywhere on this map, it'll pull up a forecast for anywhere in the country, including any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. And you may have heard in the national news of devastating tornadoes that struck areas of the lower Mississippi Valley on Friday night. One tornado in particular, Rolling Fork, Mississippi, has caused over 24 fatalities, and a series of powerful tornadoes went past just north there of Jackson, Mississippi. Now today, we have winter storm conditions up across areas of northern Michigan. We have another system back out here into the high plains, red flag warnings for high fire danger, and then back out here in through the northern Rockies, winter storm warnings and other advisories extend back here across California. So that's one way to zero on in and find out additional weather information, places where maybe family and friends live. Here in Alaska, we have another West Coast storm this weekend, producing blizzard conditions into early Monday morning. Already winds have gusted as high as 90 miles an hour at Cape Lisburne, north of Point Hope, and we expect snow and then some mixed precipitation spreading up into the interior areas of the southwest coast, especially down around the Kuskokwim and Bristol Bay areas could see a mix of precipitation spreading up into the southwest interior as a little warmer air is drawn up along the frontal system. In the southeast around the Panhandle for later tonight and Sunday, drier air is going to be coming in on brisk northeast to north winds. These gusty outflow winds are the result of a tightening pressure gradient that's going to set up across that area due to high pressure building over the Yukon territory. And overall, we're expecting near to below normal temperatures across the state here as we go into early April. Quick check of one of the FAA webcams this Saturday early afternoon, Point Hope, blizzard conditions. This is how it should look on a clear day, and that's how it has been this Saturday afternoon. Blizzard conditions extend along areas of the northwest coast, down along Kotzebue Sound, the northwest and south side of the Seward Peninsula, including Shishmaref, as well as Tin City, Wales, down through Nome. And then winter storm warnings have been issued for St. Lawrence Island, the lower Yukon Delta areas on the south and east side of Norton Sound, extending inland up along the Yukon River and along the south-facing slopes here of the Brooks Range, as well as the eastern half of the Brooks Range. So this area here, blizzard warnings. And then the interior areas under winter storm warnings. As the front pushes inland, it's going to spread snow and gusty winds across the interior, especially between the Alaska and Brooks Range as we go through Sunday, Monday, and even into early Tuesday, lingering up across these areas. Winter weather advisory, Utqiagvik toward Prudhoe Bay for conditions not quite as severe. Again, blizzard conditions, though, Wainwright down here along the Chukchi Sea coast and surrounding Seward Peninsula. And also we want to pass along on March 29th at 10:15 in the morning, there will be a tsunami test statewide. So radio stations, TV stations are going to conduct this as a safety measure. It is only a test. It'll be announced as such. Also, that test will go out over NOAA Weather Radio, just to kind of give you a heads up should you hear that warning tone on March 29th. Looking at satellite imagery, you can see this low pressure here over eastern Russia and really nice arcing strong frontal system, and along this front we have the precipitation and stronger winds, and this is going to be pushing inland, not quickly, but it will gradually push its way inland over the next couple of days and begin to weaken. But nevertheless, we have Another strong frontal system producing blizzard conditions along areas of the west central and northwest coast. It was just last weekend we had a system doing the same thing. Low pressure lingers here just off of the Panhandle coastline here in the Gulf. That's heading southeastward, so conditions will be improving across the Gulf as high pressure builds in here from northeast parts of the state, from the Yukon Flats down here into southern Yukon territory, and that's what's going to tighten the pressure gradient and produce those stronger gusty winds across areas of the northern Panhandle later tonight and on Sunday. So here's the weather map. Here's that strong low. Not especially deep, but it's a decent enough low. It's got a good pressure gradient ahead of it along this front. We have snow falling across the northwest and west central coast. Rain, though, back out here over the lower Bering Sea toward the central Aleutians. So a little warmer air is going to be pushed up inland along the Yukon River as we go through the next couple of days. So by late tonight, early on Sunday morning, we expect some mixing precipitation here around Kuskokwim Bay. And as we go into Sunday afternoon, that will spread a little further north up into the southwest interior, west of the Alaska Range. There could be a little freezing rain mixing in with the snow. And then generally rain along the southwest coast there, Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, down through portions of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. And then by Monday afternoon, the fronts just kind of wash out and weaken as troughs of low pressure that'll have some bands of light snow around them, and that feature will continue to work its way further east. Looking at temperatures, though readings are going to get below freezing across a good portion of the Panhandle, as cold as 8 below up at Glen Allen in the Copper River Basin, teens elsewhere. So it's going to be a chilly night. And then temperatures, though, should get back up above freezing in many areas and all but the Copper River Basin. Could even see an isolated 50-degree reading on Sunday across the southern parts of the Panhandle. And then again, still pretty chilly across the Copper River Basin, though not quite as cold as tonight come Monday morning. And then on Monday afternoon, we could see readings upper 30s flirting with 40 from, say, Anchorage southward, and certainly readings back up into the 40s, maybe an isolated 50-degree reading there again in the southern Panhandle. Coldest temperatures in the state will be along the Alcan border. Some areas could be as approaching 20 below, but notice moderating temperatures with that front, 32 the low there at Imanuk. And then as we go through Sunday afternoon, temperatures are going to be rising above freezing along the Yukon River and even up around or just a tad above freezing there at Nome. For Monday morning, lows will not be quite as cold. Notice that front did bring in some warmer air, upper 20s to near freezing, and that's going to be pressing eastward. So there could be a little mixed precipitation with any remnant snow here could be mixed with a little freezing rain or even plain old rain as we go into Monday. And temperatures across the Yukon Valley into the Yukon Flats, including Fairbanks, should easily be back up into the mid and upper 30s. Sunday across the southwest, we see those temperatures steady to rising overnight into the morning, back up above freezing. And then Sunday afternoon, we could see some 40-degree readings all the way up into King Salmon, Dillingham, even isolated readings up into some of the lower valleys there of the southwest interior. Monday morning lows generally near or slightly below freezing across much of the southwest, and then Monday afternoon, slightly modified, readings back into the 30s to near 40 degrees. So here's the temperature outlook for the end of March and the first few days of April. Temperatures will average a bit below normal, centered on the southeast interior and the Panhandle, near normal along the far north and western coast. And precipitation could end up being a little above normal, especially central eastern Brooks Range up through the North Slope, and then a little below normal along the Gulf Coast, including the Panhandle. But at this point, nothing too terribly out of the ordinary.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned either on Sunday or Monday, there's going to be a strong area of low pressure, though it is beginning to weaken by Sunday morning here off of the Russian Arctic coast, with a cold front extending, or an occluded front extending here through the Chukchi Sea into the western mainland coast, and then back down across the central Aleutians. A big feed of moisture coming in up from the subtropics, producing some heavier snow on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range Range, higher terrain surrounding areas of the Seward Peninsula, southwest, down into Kuskokwim Bay. And there could even be some mixed precipitation in the southern extent of this, but widespread IFR conditions are anticipated along and ahead of this frontal system by Sunday afternoon, pushing up into the central interior, especially on the south side of the Brooks Range, and then also moisture creeping up along the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. Monday morning, still widespread IFR conditions along and ahead of this front, though the front will be weakening as it moves inland, and we expect from the northeastern Alcan border all the way down through the Yukon Valley, including Kuskokwim Bay, areas of the southwest, in through the Alaska Range, far eastern Aleutians, and then going into Monday afternoon, still IFR conditions, even though the moisture is going to be pushing eastward in the form of some snow here across the central interior. IFR from areas of the eastern Brooks Range all the way down into areas near Bristol Bay and through the southern portion of the Alaska Peninsula. And at Tuvik Pass, we'll generally see IFR conditions on Sunday, as will Adigan Pass, as the lower ceilings and precipitation come into the area from the west. Further south and west on the west arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill should generally be able to hold on to MVFR conditions on Sunday. Same thing at Rainy Pass. As you go further east from the central Alaska Range eastward, VFR conditions at Windy Pass as well as Isabel and Mentasta Passes. As we go a little further southwest of there, Tanita Pass, VFR conditions are generally expected on Sunday, as well as around Portage Pass. And then as we go further east into the northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see VFR conditions as well during the day on Sunday. Freezing levels are highest, at least aloft, along and ahead of that front, bumping upwards of 2,000 to 4,000 feet along the southwest coast, including Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, upwards of 6,000 feet here in the south end of the Alaska Peninsula. Surface freezing line runs out from the central Bering up to about St. Matthew to just off of the Yukon lower delta there, and then along the northern Gulf Coast and in through the inner channels of the Panhandle. So icing, the greatest threat for considerable moderate icing will be along areas ahead and along the front, that as it pushes inland. We have lower ceilings, we have deeper cloud decks producing precipitation, snow up through here, but mixed precipitation here through the southwest coast. Above 4,000 feet there, middle Yukon Valley and along the Brooks Range slope there, the southwest slopes of the Brooks Range. Above 6,000 feet, especially here through areas of the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas, and then back along the front above 8,000 feet as you get back toward the central Aleutians. Now, jet stream winds aloft are most pronounced on the west side of the ridge axis here across the west coast, upwards to 150 knots aloft there at 30,000 feet. Winds out of the southwest bring it down to 700 millibars or 9,000 feet. A broad area of 50 to 70 knot winds cover the northwestern half of the mainland, associated with the trough that's over eastern Russia. And then as we get it down to 3,000 feet, we find a broad area of 40 to 50 knot winds nudging up into the Yukon Valley, west of the Alaska Range along Kuskokwim Bay and to the eastern Bering. Also another enhanced area of 45 to 50 knot plus winds, especially up through the Chukchi Sea and along the northwest Arctic coast. And this will translate to the greatest threat of considerable moderate turbulence and even isolated severe turbulence in areas along the northwest coast, including Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, the southwestern side of the Brooks Range. Also isolated severe turbulence possible areas of the southwest from Kuskokwim Bay up into areas of the southwest interior. Otherwise, a broad area of considerable moderate turbulence across much of the western portion of the mainland out through the Aleutians.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limit Disk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. GOLD connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is GOLD. The GOLD instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. GOLD collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. GOLD joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences. And
the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Let's take a look now at your marine weather, starting with the sea ice edge. We've had some very strong winds, again, from the southeast and south ahead and along a strong frontal system that will cause the ice to shift around, could open up some polynyas. So be aware of that. Winds have gusted as high as 90 miles an hour at Cape Lisburne on this Saturday. And as we go further south, the ice edge here along the lower Bering Sea, we could see it retreat a bit here over the next 24 hours. And then as winds try to come down or maybe shift, have a little bit of a westerly component to it, might at least prevent any further retreat, and could even advance a little bit southward on some of the edges. But nevertheless, with these strong winds in place around Norton Sound along the YK deltas, certainly the ice will shift around, and there could be some polynyas and short fast ice that tends to want to try to break away. Looking at the southeast panhandle on Sunday, brisk north winds here along Lynn Canal, upwards of 30 knots. Not quite as strong as you get down toward Ketchikan, 15 knots or so from the northwest. Offshore flow out of the northeast as high as 30 miles an hour near and north of Sitka. Waves generally running 5 to 7 feet there in the nearshore waters of the Gulf. On Monday, winds will turn north-northwest around 15 knots, inner channels, waves 2 to 3 feet there. And for the nearshore waters within 15 nautical miles of the coastal areas of the Gulf, we expect waves to be generally running right around 5 feet or so. For the northwestern Gulf, variable winds 10 knots off the Kenai. North winds, though, 15 knots with 2-3 foot waves in Prince William Sound, and then look for northeast to north winds 10 to 15 knots through upper and middle Cook Inlet. Northeasterly around 15 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves around 3 feet. Monday, Not a whole lot of change. Variable winds, though, off the Kenai along the Gulf Coast and on up into Prince William Sound around 10 knots. Waves running 2 to maybe as high as 3-4 feet off the Kenai. And winds will try to turn more southerly here along the length of Cook Inlet at 15 to 20 knots. There is a frontal system just off to the west there. They'll be pushing eastward and weakening with waves running around 3 feet. Now across Kodiak Island on Sunday, southerly winds 15 to 20 knots. Waves 3 to 5 feet once you get south of there. Winds pick up upwards of 20 to 25 knots from the south here, with waves as much as 5-6 feet there north of Cold Bay. And then on Monday, kind of a bit of a mixed bag of winds. Wind southwest to south 20 knots around the vicinity of Kodiak Island, kind of turning back more toward the east and then northeast as we go down the middle and lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula at 15 to 20 knots, waves 5 to 6 feet on either side there in the North Pacific or in the lower Bering Sea. Across the Aleutians, winds southerly ahead of the front. This is the tail or trailing end of the frontal system really hitting the west, central and northwest coast. Winds ahead of it 25-30 knots, shifting westerly 20 to as high as 30 knots west of Kiska on Sunday. And then on Monday, winds come down across at least the central Aleutians, but still out of the north 20 to 25 knots post-frontal on Monday. And then they turn back around toward the southwest and south, 35 to 40 knot gales west of Adak, with waves building over 10 feet there, especially west of Kiska, as much as 15 to near 20 feet. Now, the southwest coast in Norton Sound, south winds ahead of the front, anywhere from around 20 to 30 knots. And as we go into Monday, winds try to have a little more of a westerly component here out over along the ice edge and open water. Still south-southwest component, 15 to 20 knots there into Norton Sound, and ice in place. Strongest winds with the system are going to be areas along the southwest and north side of the Seward Peninsula and up along the northwest coast. We could see sustained winds as high as 45 knots here around Point Hope and Cape Lisburne on Sunday. So blizzard conditions continuing in these areas and also down around potentially Kotzebue Sound, the northwest and south side of the Seward Peninsula. And then on Monday, winds will come down region-wide, generally 15 to 20 knots east of Utqiagvik from the southwest, and then generally southwest winds 20 to 25 knots from Utqiagvik to Point Hope, and then southward through the Bering Strait with the ice there in place. But as I mentioned, the previous winds here over the weekend certainly could have opened up some plinias. There's the front, moves inland overnight, continues to slowly press eastward on Sunday, and by Monday, those frontal systems should have weakened considerably, with the next system way out there in the western Bering.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.